The views, comments, stories, and opinions within this podcast are my own or those of my guests, and in no way represent the views of the company or companies that I or we work for.
Wind shear, wind shear, wind shear.
Caution, terrain. Caution, terrain. Too low, terrain. Too low, terrain.
Stall. 2,500. 1,000. 500, 400, 300, minimum 200, 100 above. 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. Retard.
Squawk Ident is an entertainment podcast dedicated to the journey and the challenges surrounding the life and career of Aviator Tony, an airline pilot currently flying for a legacy airline with close to 20 years on the flight line. This is episode 5 of Squawk Ident, recorded on October 23rd, 2019, from the Aviator Studios somewhere in Southern California. On this episode of Squawk Ident, we'll dive into the last trip I just finished a few days ago. It was a wonderful 2-day trip that did not have a red eye on either side of it. Now, when you're based in the Los Angeles area, red eyes are quite the norm, and it was quite the treat to have a 2-day trip that did not touch one of those. Also, we're going to look at commuting 101. As part of an airline career, especially at the beginning of it, you can expect to commute unless you're fortunate enough to live in base. As I've spoken about in previous episodes, commuting is definitely something you should know a little bit about, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the do's and the don'ts of commuting. We have a few good stories about that as well, and in a segment called There We Were, we're going to talk about Snowzilla. That was February of 2011, where Chicago experienced as much as 2 feet of snow and blizzard conditions with winds of over 60 miles an hour. And yes, I was there. All that and more on this episode of Squawk Ident. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the show. It has been just an absolute delight to be able to produce Squawk Ident, the podcast. I've received quite a bit of feedback in the past few weeks, and all of it has been very positive. So I thank you very much for tuning in and listening. Make sure that you don't forget to subscribe to Squawk Ident so you can get the latest in episodes as soon as they become available. So let's go on with the show here. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was this trip that I just finished a few days ago. It was a really cool trip. As I mentioned in the opener, it was a 2-day trip that didn't have any late night or red eye flying in it, which is really considered a relatively senior trip. And I'm very fortunate that at this point in my career, I'm starting to see a trip here and there that has these kind of great qualities in it. The small downside was that it started at 11:45 in the morning, which meant I had to be at the airport somewhere around 10 a.m. And of course, being a weekday, that meant a little bit of LA traffic. Now, it could be worse. The trip that I'm actually going to start tomorrow starts at 9 a.m., meaning my sign-in is at 9 a.m., which means early morning AM LA traffic. And that is not something that I would wish upon my worst enemy. That is one of the downsides of living in Southern California. But we are going to dive into more of that on the next episode. So let's talk about this 2-day trip I took. It started out, like I said, around 11:45, and it was one leg to Lihue, which is on the beautiful island of Kauai. Now, it was the first time flying with this captain that I flew with, and he was a pretty outstanding guy. And one of the funniest things that happened was when I met my flight attendant crew. So we got on the airplane and we all kind of said hello and introduced ourselves. And just kind of to break the ice, I always try to kind of give a little, not a joke, but kind of a funny anecdote, break the ice. And what happened was I introduced myself to everyone. And when I was getting ready to do the walk around, I had my gear ready to go. And as I'm walking off the airplane, my number one flight attendant asked me, "Hey, can I get you anything for the trip?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm okay. I'll just wait until it's a real inopportune time and you're very busy in the middle of a bunch of stuff, and I'll ask you for something pretty ridiculous and obnoxious, and we'll go from there." And usually that gets a laugh or some kind of smart remark. And the smart remark that I got kind of threw me for a surprise. She looked at me and said, "Well, that's a good way to get some spit in your food." And I had a really nervous, loud laugh. And I was just, okay. And I looked at her and I said, "Well, no, I have no intention of swapping spit with you today. So I'll let that one go." And we both laughed a little bit, but it broke the ice and we got along relatively well after that. So I did the walk around, and when I came back, she's still kind of smiling about that. And we went off doing our pre-flight duties and did the trip as normal. So when I got to Lahui, about 5.5 hours en route, and here it is, late afternoon, Hawaii time, and I'm on the curb waiting for the hotel van. Now, waiting for the hotel van is a topic that we can really dive into on a future show, because it is a common bane and pain of most flight crews when the hotel van or the transportation service is not there. Now, some people that maybe are not in the industry might think, well, why? I mean, are you guys really that snobby? I mean, can't wait a few minutes? Well, let me break it down just real briefly. You've been flying all day. You're exhausted, you're tired, or even if you're not, you've been on duty for 8, 10, 12, 14 hours, whatever it is. And the only thing you really want to do is go and get to the hotel and take off your uniform, get cleaned up, and just put your feet up for a few minutes and just have that chaos behind you. Now, when I say chaos, think about it. Most of you that have traveled have been in an airport and it's noisy. Noise is the number one fatiguing issue of anyone being in a crowded space. If you remove the noise, it is not as fatiguing. There are studies that have been proven that this is so. Why do you think noise-canceling headphones are so popular? And why do you think so many people wear them in busy airports or on airplanes? It's because they're reducing that noise level. So the last thing you want to do after being exposed to all this noise, having worked this many hours on duty, who knows what environmental conditions you were in last, and now you got to sit on a curb, on a noisy, busy, exhaust ridden curb, and you're waiting for a van that's not there. Okay, so we wait 5, 10, 15 minutes. The van's still not there. So it's an issue. And unfortunately, it's one that's very common. So when we get to Lahui, when we got to Lahui, we kind of looked at this and said, okay, is the van, what's going on? Are we going to take a cab here? And so we made a phone call. Turns out that they had already dispatched a cab for us. So it was just my captain and I who went to the hotel. And as we were sitting there waiting for this cab to show up, I hear, "Hey, Tony." And I look over and I see a friend of mine that worked with me at my previous employer when I was flying for the regional. And she was a flight attendant over there. And probably a few years before I made the transition over to Legacy Airlines, she did too. And so talk about small world, right? So we said hello, said, "How are you?" and all this kind of stuff. And come to find out that, she was staying at a different location than I was, which is very common as well. And so the point is very small industry. And, you stop and think, well, man, there's a lot of airlines out there and a lot of pilots and a lot of flight crew, flight attendants. I mean, it's really not that small. Actually, it very much is, because the people that you even flew with when you were just learning how to fly could be someday your chief pilot somewhere, or could be your captain somewhere, or one of the flight attendants that you flew with could end up being your co-pilot. So just be aware that it is a small industry, and the person that you're working with today, the tables can be turned. So just be cognizant of that. It's a small world. Never burn a bridge, and always put your best foot forward in that. So back to the trip. So I saw Maggie. I said hello. And we went off in two different directions, but it was so nice to see a familiar face. So the hotel was nice. It was a beautiful evening, around 5 p.m., and just a wonderful temperature. There was a trickle of rain that was coming through every once in a while, and I got to share a meal with some fellow hotel goers there at the local restaurant/bar there at the hotel. And after that, I jotted down a couple ideas for this episode and retired to my room, and I crashed hard. It had been a long week. We had a family event that happened a few days earlier, and it was just go, 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 which anybody that knows me knows that is the norm. So it was a nice, restful evening. The next morning, I had full intention of getting up and going for a run and watching the sunrise, because I try to do my best to keep my body clock on keel with what my home time is. And Hawaii is 3 hours behind Pacific time, so I wanted to go to bed a little earlier and wake up a little earlier. But I don't know, the conditions were just right in that hotel room. It was dark, it was cool, and I slept in until I think it was 10 a.m., which for me is like 1 o'clock. It was amazing. So I got up, went for my run, and felt great. It was really warm, humid conditions, because it had showers had gone through earlier in the evening the night before, and some of that humidity was left over. So it was a little tough to breathe, but a very, very good run. So I got back, got cleaned up, had lunch, and just about an hour or two of extra time where I just lounged around and hung out by the pool for a little bit. And then it was time to pack up and get ready to go back to LA. So a very nice 2-day trip. It was all business, a little bit of R&R in there, and I got back to LA with absolutely no issues. So a lot of you listening that are in the industry are probably going, God, this guy's bragging over here. But let me assure you, life was not always this cush. Okay, I commuted off and on for 13 plus years, and commuting is absolutely no joke. This is Commuting 101. So what's the big deal about commuting? I've had many of my friends and family ask me, so how do you get to work when you're based in Chicago, but you live in LA? How does that work? So here's the skinny of it. So for those of you that are not in the industry, commuting is an absolute normal thing. And in order to get to your base, you're going to have to probably catch a flight, for those of you that don't live in base. And you're like, well, why don't you just live in base? So it's, well, if my base changes every few years because I'm trying to get better quality of life here or there, or an airplane that I'm currently typed on is no longer going to be flying out of that base, or the seniority is changing, whatever the case may be, odds are I'm not going to be at that base for very long. So there are many different factors that would create an issue to where your schedule will change, your quality of life will change, your seniority could change because of movement within the company with aircraft or even with bases. So odds are you're not going to keep the same base for your entire career. Most pilots at one point or another commute because living in the cities where the major airports are is very expensive. So you're better off in terms of financially to live somewhere where it's a little bit more affordable and then just fly into work, which is what my life was for the first half of my career. So commuting back and forth to Chicago was something I had to get used to. And I had quite a bit of advice from the people that were a little bit more experienced that gave me the time to explain a few things to me. And I've learned a lot of things along the way too about commuting. I think the most important thing to talk about is jump seat etiquette. So wait a minute, you just said commuting. What's this jump seat? So let's say I'm based in Chicago and I live in LA. So I have to get to work. So I have to figure out what flights are gonna be able to get me there on time. And I'll have to plan accordingly, drive to the airport, park in some kind of parking facility if I'm fortunate enough to where I can park in an employee lot. Great. And then the company would pay for that or reimburse me for that. Or a lot of people that live in areas where there's smaller airports that are not based with the major airline, they're more outstations than anything else. Well, they'll have to find a long-term parking lot that the airport has set aside for employees and then pay for that and then get reimbursed from the company if the company does that. So I was in a situation for many years where I had to pay out of pocket and the company reimbursed me for at least a portion of that long-term parking. So I'd have to figure out, okay, I'm going to get to the parking lot, take the employee bus, get to the airport, go through security, and get to the gate on time for at least giving myself 2 chances to get to work. I'd have to make sure I can get to the first flight in a reasonable amount of time. And then if the flight was full, then I could have the option, if no one else was there or no one was in front of me, to ride in what they call the cockpit jump seat. If there were available seats in the back and no paying customers were asking for those seats and they were just going to go open, then I get the chance to sit in those seats. Now, if it's on your own metal or your own company or your own company's affiliate, then those seats are yours. You just put yourself on the list. You go through the website or the software, the app, whatever your company uses, and you would list yourself and you could see where you are in your list. And when you get to the gate, they'll assign you a boarding card and you take your seat and there you go. When you're commuting on another carrier, then it's a little different. Now, you show up to the gate, you go through whatever procedures they have, and you list yourself. They check all your credentials and your security background and all that good stuff. And then you have to introduce yourself to the captain, because the captain is the final authority on whether or not you can ride. And for whatever reason, they can deny you a seat in the back. They can deny you a jump seat. So it's important that you introduce yourself, say hello, you're courteous, and you ask. This was the very first point I heard as a new hire. You always ask when you're riding on another carrier if you can ride either in the back or in the jump seat. So the interaction usually went like this. Hi, Captain. I'm Tony. I fly for a regional airline, and I would love to have a ride with you today to work, if you don't mind. Looks like they gave me a seat in the back, if that's okay with you. Here's my employee badge. Here's my pilot certificate and my medical. And usually 9 out of 10, the captain will go, oh, yeah, welcome aboard. How's everything going over there? And you have a chit chat for a minute or two if they have the time. And 9 out of 10, they'll say, oh, yeah, welcome aboard. Enjoy. We'll see you there. And that's how the interaction goes. Now, if the flight is full, then you're in the cockpit jump seat if they allow it. And the interaction is identical. Hey, Captain, how you doing? I'm Tony. How you doing? Is it all right if I ride in your jump seat today? It looks like the flight's going to be full. And here are my credentials. And again, you go, oh, well, no seat in the back. Okay, well, yeah, welcome aboard. Stow your bag and let's get to it. So that's usually how it goes. Okay, now that's not how it always goes. And some of the biggest mistakes people make, especially if they've been flying for many years and you're used to flying on your own metal. And side note, even if you're flying on your own metal. So I fly for Legacy Airlines. If I'm trying to get to work and I'm commuting and the only seat available is the jump seat, I still have to ask permission because at the end of the day, it's the captain's discretion, always, even on your own metal, when you're in the cockpit jump seat. So if I'm on a Legacy Airlines jump seat trying to get to work, Captain, you mind if I ride in your jump seat today? Oh, you're one of us? Oh, okay, let me see. Okay, fine. They check your credentials. You're good to go. 9 out of 10. So what happens when things don't go as smoothly as that? Well, I'll tell you, the number one mistake is assuming that jump seat's yours. It's not. It's the captain who's flying. That's his jump seat or her jump seat. You got to ask. I can't tell you how many times people have come up into the cockpit and going, hey, Captain, I'll be riding up here in the jump seat. That's the only seat available. Oh, really? You usually hear. Well, who do you fly for? Oh, okay. And already there's you're off to a bad start, So the number one rule, always ask the other guy. Always ask the captain if it's okay to ride in the jump seat. Now, if you're on your own metal, you got a seat in the back, it's a done deal. You don't even really have to say anything because they can look if they want to and see your name on the list and what seat you got and all that. But in the jump seat, you always ask. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Well, I'll tell you, when things don't go so smoothly, it's usually pretty ridiculous. Let me explain. So about 10, maybe 9 years ago, I was a relatively senior FO at the regional airline that I used to fly for. And it was about 2 weeks before Christmas, a busy holiday season. And as you can imagine, those jump seats are usually full during the holiday seasons because the flights are full. So as an airline crew member, you're probably going to be in a jump seat if you're trying to do whatever, get to work, go visit your family, what have you. So I was sitting there in Chicago and a figure appeared in the cockpit, a young man wearing a regular, street clothes. And he says, hey, Captain, how you doing? They gave me a seat in the back. I just wanted to say hello. And my captain turned around and said, oh, hi there. Getting a ride? He's like, yeah, they got me all checked out up there. Just catching a ride, fly for another regional airline. And my captain goes, oh, great, good to have you. Going to visit someone? Oh, yeah, just going to see my Nana, he says, for Christmas. I'm getting there a little early, about a week ahead. I've got some time off, so it's going to be a nice trip. And he says, oh, yeah, that's great. Hey, well, welcome. Do you happen to have any of your credentials, your badge, and your stuff? He's like, well, no, they checked me out up top, and they just gave me this boarding card here with the seat number on it. And he goes, well, yeah, but you don't fly for us, and I'm supposed to check your badge and, your pilot's license and your medical and stuff. He goes, well, Captain, there's a problem there. I actually left all that at home and I totally forgot everything on my lanyard. I have a little pouch on my lanyard, has everything there. And I left it all. The only thing I have is my driver's license and, my wallet. And the captain kind of was like, well, okay, I'm supposed to check this stuff. I mean, do you have at least one of these items? Do you have your badge at least, or something to just says that you're you? And he goes, well, no, I don't, but they checked me up there, so I'm all good, right? He's like, well, I don't know what to do here because I got to follow the rules. You gotta have something to show me. He's like, well, I'm in the back, man. And so Captain got, thrown aback a little bit by that response. And he looks at me and the captain looks at me and says, well, God, what do you think we should do? I mean, how can we get around this? And I look at him like, well, do you have a temporary schedule that, you said you flew earlier today? Do you have a printout of your schedule, or do you have a temporary certificate? You can do that on your computer and show us something. He goes, no, no, man, I don't have any of that. He goes, man, I'm just trying to go see my Nana. And of course, this is a kind of a no-no. It's a security issue. He honestly should have never made it past the gate agent. So now another figure appears, and it was one of the supervisors that was observing all the flights in that area, in that zone that's being boarded. And since it was very close to go time, he came down and goes, everything okay, guys? All good to go? And Captain goes, oh, no, step in here. This individual here, I'm trying to help him out and get him to go see his family, but he doesn't have any ID or any identification. I mean, he's like, what? Because, well, I didn't check him in. So kind of a big deal. If you don't have an ID, I mean, how do you know who you work for? How do we know that? So this individual got very upset very quickly, and he goes, this is bullshit. And he goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. So now the captain gets up, and they're on the jet bridge, and he's like, wait a minute, you're a captain at you're out there, so security issues here. What's your deal? And the two of them start going at it. And now the supervisor's like, oh, I'm so sorry. You're going to have to come with me. You have to come back up, and the captain gets back in the cockpit, and he's visibly upset. I mean, he really felt bad. He wanted to, hook up a fellow aviator and get him going where he needed to go, but he had absolutely no credentials to prove he was who he was. And whatever, the ball was dropped at the gate area, and it was kind of a big deal. And it really bothered my captain because he didn't want to come off as kind of a jerk, but he knew that there was a problem here. This just wasn't right. And so we start to talk, and I said, well, who's to say that this individual didn't get terminated from his employment hours ago, and now he's trying to just, circumvent the security system and get a ride somewhere. And I mean, we don't know this. I mean, I hate to think that way, but it's very important to look at security and not waver from the rules that have been set in place. And that kind of gave him a little bit of solace, but absolutely kind of the whole scenario kind of blew up. It got loud. It was in front of passengers. It was not good. And those are some of the things that, really come out as a big no-no. You got to have your paperwork in order. You got to ask, and you got to be cool when it's not, because you could burn a bridge and get, blacklisted for a period of time if you're caught doing stuff against the policy or the company policy or security regulations. So yeah, not a good situation there at all. But not having your ID is not a very common thing. I mean, this was kind of a unique circumstance. And through further research later that evening, I did find out that the individual that was trying to get to where he was going did get there. So for whatever reason, he must have, went home, grabbed his paperwork, and a couple hours later made a flight. So, but what does happen quite often which is absolutely just a huge, huge no-no, is when you get a jump seater, everything's legit, everything works out okay, all the security paperwork's been checked, and now you've got a guest in your cockpit. And they are, let's just say, for whatever reason, quietly expelling gas. All right, okay, let's get down to it. They're farting, okay? Huge no-no. You're enclosed in a pressurized vessel. You can't roll down the windows. You're freaking traveling at 400 or 500 miles an hour, 6 miles above the surface of the earth, and you have airflow, sure, from the air conditioning and pneumatic system there, heating and air, but, and you look over when you smell it, and you look at the other pilot and you're like, did you, we've been flying together for a few days. And they look at you and they kind of like say, no, it wasn't me. And so then they look at you like, was it you? No, it wasn't me. So then, usually both of you will kind of like look back at your jump seater, which is sitting behind you against the back wall. And it wasn't either one of you because, you both looked at each other and it's like, no. So, oh my God, guys, we all have to kind of take care of business sometimes, but for the love of God, don't do it in the cockpit, because talk about hot box. That is a fart box right there. It is nasty. Nobody wants to smell your shit. You think, I'm just going to let a little one out. Just a little poop. No, don't do it. I don't do it ever. If I do, I'll say, hey man, I got to go use the restroom. How hard is that? It's not hard. Just get out, go into the lab, do what you got to do. But don't do it in the cockpit. That is a very, very common thing. I can remember one time we had a guy who, he was, poor guy. He was just trying to get home after a long trip, and he sits in the jump seat. Everything's good to go. We take off. We're at cruise altitude, and I look back, and this guy is dead asleep. He is out, and which is very common. These guys are tired. They get to altitude, and they pass out. And this guy was passed out and just had his feet up on the pedestal and just kind of snoring away, breathing heavy. And all of a sudden, we hear this just nasty fart, and we both like, holy crap. The guy woke himself up. He woke himself up. Oh God, I'm so sorry. We all laughed so hard. I'm like, oh man, dude. So, okay, oxygen mask on. All right. Open all the vents. Oh my God, this is bad. Oh, Jesus. So it happens. But, just a big no-no. Absolute. Rule number 2, don't fart in the cockpit. But not every experience I've had while commuting, jump seating myself, have been negative. I actually learned so very much my first few years commuting every week back and forth, because I'd say about 50% of the time I had to sit in the jump seat. Now, as a regional pilot at the time, I spent a lot of time commuting on mainline. And depending on which flight I took, I was either in the jump seat of another carrier's 75 or Airbus A321, or I was on our carrier or our partner carrier, the Legacy airline, and I'd be in the jump seat of a 73, an MD-80, an Airbus, even a 787. Even once had the privilege of sitting in the jump seat on a United 747 before they all got retired. So some amazing, amazing experiences. Hundreds of hours sitting in the jump seat, watching, observing, watching flows, watching how they do checklists. And I found out a lot of things. Most importantly, I found out that it doesn't matter what level of aviator you are, whether you're just starting out at a regional airline or you have been flying for a legacy carrier for 40 years. It doesn't matter. All pilots make mistakes. All pilots have a certain way of doing checklists and running through procedures. And for the most part, we're pretty much uniform in the way we do things. But hey, we're all human as well. So I used to think that flying or commuting to work made me a better aviator. Now, I am of the belief that commuting for all those years with hundreds of hours observing in the cockpit because I had to, commuting back and forth to Chicago, I gotta tell you, I've learned more from watching guys and gals take care of business up there than I probably have by studying or reading about things. And the great opportunities that I've seen them run through emergencies, I've seen one of my absolute favorite. I was just coming out of the schoolhouse, which was, my recurrent training back in Dallas. And I had to catch a ride home on a 777. And the only seat available was the cockpit jump seat. I was like, yeah, I haven't been in a 777 before in the jump seat. That'd be a great opportunity, sure. So I was able to get the jump seat. And as we're getting to know each other, as we're at cruise altitude, the captain and the first officer are telling me how they usually don't fly during the day. And this is the first time they've flown with the sun out over the United States in months, if not years. And it was a pretty good crew. The captain was a couple years from retirement. First officer, she was very experienced with a lot of years in the right seat. And, we were just kind of going over some stories here and there. And all of a sudden, the flight attendant called using the intercom and said, "Hey, Captain, we have a passenger that's having a heart attack. We have a doctor on board who is checking her out, and she's traveling with her family, and we are going to administer the AED." And the captain said, "Oh, okay, give me more information as soon as you can." So she came back not even a minute later and said, "Yep, the doctor says she's stable. However, he recommends that we land at the nearest available airport." So, okay, emergency declaration was declared, and we started to proceed to the nearest available airport. And what I witnessed was one of the greatest learning experiences for me, and has helped me out over the years. The captain immediately handed the aircraft over to his first officer. She assumed the control of the aircraft and ATC radio communications. But that was after the captain declared the medical emergency and indicated that the nearest suitable airport was going to be Albuquerque, New Mexico. So they gave us direct to Albuquerque. They gave us the descent clearance, and he handed the aircraft over to her and started to type in all the navigation information in the flight management system. Meanwhile, he was, passing papers back to me. I was pulling things off the printer, all the dispatchers' notifications. I was pulling them off the printer, handing them to him, trying to help wherever I could without getting in the way. And he also made a couple of PAs to the passenger, letting them know what was going on. And as he was talking to the passengers, we started our descent. We're just, going straight to the airport. And a message comes through on the printer, and I look at it, read it right away, and I kind of tapped the captain as he was giving his PA, because the message was very urgent. It said, "Do not land at Albuquerque. We don't have the numbers for Albuquerque with the 777. If you land there, you're going to get stuck there. You can't land there. There's another destination that's just a couple more minutes down the road for you from your current position, which is Phoenix. And so Phoenix, you can land there, and you've got performance numbers to take off again, and they've got the medical facilities, everything standing by." So the captain goes, "Oh, okay, change the destination." So from our present position, it didn't add more than a few minutes. And so he set all that up. And when he was ready, he reassumed command of the aircraft. And watching the coordination happening between the crew members, between the captain and the cabin crew, between ATC and the captain and the first officer, it was a wonderful experience. And it got all of our hearts racing. This captain commanded this 777 like it was a Cessna 172. He brought that thing in. He was just screaming down, went to flight idle, dropped the flaps, the slats, the gear, all in perfect synchronicity. And we touched down right at the aiming point markers. As we turned off the runway, they gave us taxi instructions to park into our alley. At the same time, the first officer brought up the operations frequency, notified them that we were on the ground and we were heading to a gate. The operations manager got on the radio and said, "No, don't park at a gate. Our only tow bar for a 777 is broken. We have to find another place to park. You will bring stairs to you, and paramedics are standing by." So the captain communicated that with air traffic control, and the air traffic controller said, "Okay, fine, park in front of the fire station." And the captain said, "Okay." So he commanded the aircraft, and right before he pulled into the area that they gave him clearance to park, he stopped the aircraft and asked, "Is the asphalt in front of the fire station certified for the weight of a 777? And there was silence for a moment. And the air traffic controller said, "You know what? I don't think so. Just you're on the taxiway. Just go ahead and shut down right there. We're going to have the fire truck stairs brought to you, and we'll handle the situation on the taxiway. We're shutting down this side of the airport." So the south side of Phoenix Sky Harbor was shut down while they brought the stairs up, opened the door. The passenger and her family left. The paramedics took them and escorted them to the hospital. Meanwhile, the station manager brought paperwork. The fuel truck was already hooked up to the aircraft, got the fuel back up to the required amount, the paperwork all handled, the first officer already putting in the flight plan from our current airport to our final destination, which was Los Angeles. And the entire turnaround, including the captain getting out of his seat, standing in the galley and making it PA to all his passengers, took less than 20 minutes. We were back up in the air and only about 40 minutes, and we were in Los Angeles. It was one of the most exciting experiences while sitting in the jump seat that I was able to witness. I felt a connection with that crew. The captain thanked me for the help that I had, even though it was a very small, minute portion of the whole situation. But I tell you, what I experienced that day, what I took away from it, seeing how cool everybody stayed under the pressure and quick on their feet to make sure that every decision was made together, captain and first officer, and the cabin crew and the flight deck crew, all working together. It just was a beautiful thing, and an experience that I could never have imagined if I didn't actually live through it. So there's so much that can be learned from sitting in a jump seat commuting. And I really think that every aviator should experience that, should experience some time commuting, even if you live in base. Maybe instead of the $500 cheeseburger is what they call in general aviation, when you hop into a Cessna, fly to an airport 200 miles away, land, have a cheeseburger that's super expensive, and then fly all the way back. And at the end of it all, it costs $500 for the aircraft rental and the fuel and everything. But it was one of the great ways to build time. And the general aviation world. In the airline world, I think, hey, you got a couple days off, list yourself for a jump seat on a full flight. go somewhere, spend the day, go to Six Flags, I don't know, do something, and then grab the jump seat and come back. Give yourself a couple opportunities to make sure you can. It's so awesome to sit in the jump seat, and you learn so much. And it doesn't have to be, a major airline jump seat or a heavy aircraft. Even in the regional airplanes, I mean, there's a lot to learn, a lot to see, a lot to experience. So with the holidays fast approaching, as I mentioned earlier, jump seating is going to get crowded. And we've talked about commuting horror stories before with, more pilots than there are jump seats available. And the holidays are the time of year for these kind of stories, unfortunately, to come to fruition. So as the holidays approach, be ready. These kind of experiences can really flip your schedule around and cause you to miss a flight or two. I can remember one time, probably 10 years ago, maybe more. I just finished a long 4-day trip in Chicago, and I had to catch a ride back home. At the time, I was living in Seattle. And the next available flight was a United flight. So I booked it over. I dropped my kit bag in the kit bag room. Okay, again, I'm dating myself, I know. So I leave my kit bag in the kit bag room, and I take my overnight bag and I book it over to the United terminal, which for those of you that are familiar with Chicago, it is a good mile, maybe even a mile and a half to get from one side of the Chicago O'Hare airport to 2 terminals over to the United side, which included the whole escalator tunnel under the ramp area. So here I go all the way to the other side of the airport, and I get the jump seat on 757. So I introduce myself. I say, Captain, hi, thanks. My name's Tony. I work for a regional airline. And if I can get a ride home, that would be great. Here's my credentials. And he says, oh yeah, welcome aboard. Yeah, no problem. Glad to have you. He's like, well, there's some thunderstorms in the area. I think we have an edict time, but we'll get you there. We'll get you there. And I'm like, yo, thanks, man. I appreciate that. He's like, I'll make yourself comfortable, and don't worry about it. It's all good. I said, oh, thank you. So I strap myself in. We push off the gate. We're taxiing out, and I noticed that there's a really long conga line of aircraft waiting to take off. They're using only 2 runways instead of the usual 3, so this is creating long delays and backups, and as the captain mentioned earlier, it was going to be a while. So I was just so tired, and so I put my head against one of the panels back there. Not very comfortable at all, but I was so tired I didn't care. I fell asleep, and I was out for a long time. And I think about an hour and a half later, at least that's what they tell me. About an hour and a half later, I wake up and we're still on the ground in Chicago. There's about 25 airplanes in front of us to make it to the runway. Both engines are shut down. The APU is humming. The air conditioning packs are on. And I woke up and I'm batting my eyes. I look at the guy and I'm like, oh my God, are we still on the ground in Chicago? He's like, oh, both the captain and the first officer were like, man, dude, you were out. You were breathing so heavy. We felt bad, for you. Obviously, you're really tired. We were up here, we were whispering and trying not to make too much noise for you. I was like, oh, guys, you didn't have to do that. Thanks, man. I'm sorry I fell asleep. I was just so tired. He's like, you must have had a rough week. I said, yeah, actually, I have had a, long week and, thunderstorm delays and all that. And he's like, oh, man, I hear you. He's like, well, hopefully, we'll get out of here pretty soon, but, we haven't gone anywhere yet. It's been just about 2 hours since we pushed off the gate. It's like, oh, crap. Mind you, this was before the whole passenger bill of rights movement that created the 3-hour rule. For those of you who are not familiar, the 3-hour rule is a law that was put into place after quite a few aircraft one year had these long tarmac delays. We're talking 4 or 5 hours. And so now the 3-hour rule is if you don't have the opportunity to deplane, the FAA could fine the airline a lot of money. I don't want to give you an exact number because I'm not sure exactly the amount, but it comes out to a lot of money per passenger. And, you know, an airplane full of people, especially 200 people, it could be in the millions of fines. So after 2 hours, we're already like, okay, it's been 2 hours. If we can't be airborne in the next, 30 minutes, we're going to start looking at going back and trying to get a gate and give people the opportunity to get off the airplane. So this wasn't around back then. So it took a good 2.5, almost 3 hours before we got off the ground in Chicago that day. And then, of course, another 4.5 hours flying time to get to Seattle. And it was a very, very long day. And the one time I probably conked out before we even took off. So commuting can be hard, especially after a very long sequence from the line. So earlier in the broadcast, I mentioned Snowzilla. Now, I'm going to take you back to February 1st and 2nd of 2011. There was a winter storm that they dubbed Snowpocalypse or Snowzilla, and it ended up being coined as Snowmageddon. What happened was a winter storm created a nor'easter-style event over the Chicago metropolitan area. This winter storm actually migrated east and northeast towards Canada and New York. And I was flying a 4-day sequence. And all week, my captain and I were discussing when we were going to finish, what's the weather looking like, and is it going to affect us? And all the indicators that we had up to that point, whether it was checking the NOAA website, whether it was checking the Weather Channel information, or even the news affiliates, it all looked like it wasn't going to hit the Chicago area until later in the evening on our last day of the trip. And our trip was supposed to finish up in the afternoon. So we were timing it just right. Okay, I'm going to catch this flight to get home, and that's going to give me a 2-hour break before the winter storm comes and shuts it all down. And so you can imagine the flight crews, even the passengers, were talking about this event to the days up to the point where it happened. And I can remember my last turn on that trip was a Toronto turn. So it was Chicago to Toronto and then back. And, we were checking the weather en route. We're pulling up, TAFs, the terminal area forecasts and everything. And as soon as we landed in Toronto, the gate agent came down and said, "Okay, guys, you're canceled." And we're like, what? Really? It's like, yeah, you're canceled. Chicago's being hit. The next flight is still going on, but you're going to be deadheading on that one. And I need you guys to get your stuff, go through customs, and then re-enter customs, coming back and go through TSA. And you got to be back here at this gate for the next flight, because right now you're deadheading on the next flight. And you only have about 45 minutes to do that, which is not enough time to go through two customs, both US and Canadian, and go through their TSA, their version of TSA. So we booked it. We packed up our stuff and we're like, oh, I'm not getting stuck here. This is ridiculous. So we went through customs. They actually escorted us to the front. We went through the crew portal. We went through the customs, came back through security. The gate agent was waiting for us, walked us over to the gate. And as soon as we got there, the other agent goes, "Oh no, they canceled. There's nothing coming in today. We're done." And our captain and I and my flight attendant were like, "What?" seriously? And they're like, yeah, you guys are going out in 2 days. And we're like, wait, we're stuck here for 2 days? What's going on? It's not even, it's snowing right here right now. It's like, well, Chicago's completely shut down. And, because of that weather, they've, predetermined that this many cancellations were in effect. And I mean, that's it. And so my captain goes, well, I could probably just catch a flight somewhere else, and then, make it home on my own. He goes, but, what's the use? I'm stuck here anyways. We'll just go to the hotel for a few days. It's fine. He goes, I might try to get out tomorrow. I was like, okay. So, we agreed we were just going to go to the hotel. And so we check in, and the next day it starts to drag the Snowmageddon reach out to Toronto. And we were stuck there in the hotel for 2 days. And my captain and flight attendant, I lost track of them. This is before, texting and all this stuff was so popular now. You can even look people up on social media and go, hey, what you doing? Are you stuck here or whatever? But that wasn't the case. So I was like, okay. So I put on everything I packed with me, everything. I had jeans, running shoes, sweaters, and a leather jacket. I mean, I was wearing everything, a beanie, leather gloves. I go downstairs. I'm like, hey, can someone take me over to the mall across the street? It was literally, there was like a freeway overpass, and it was right on the other side of the freeway. And I'll go to the food court, walk around the mall. I mean, what am I going to do? Sit in my hotel room? So much, French television that you can watch. And then it's like, okay. So, and the van driver goes, oh, no, I cannot take you. And I said, wait, what? Well, why not? Well, not just like these. I'm like, I'm wearing everything I have. I'm fine. I've got, I got my beanie. I've got my gloves. I'm good. He's like, no, you don't understand. The roads, they may shut down, and then you'll be stuck there, and there's no way for you to get back. I'm sorry. I will not take you. Seriously? I mean, he's like, no, I cannot do it. I'm sorry. They're going to shut the roads. It's like, well, fine. I guess I'm at the mercy of this transportation here. And it was snowing really bad. So I ended up going into the hotel restaurant, which in Canada, if you eat at a hotel restaurant, on top of the sales tax, they charge you what they call a hospitality tax. So, you're adding another 20% to the bill just for eating at a restaurant because, hey, why not? So I went in there, young FO, not making much money. I talked to the bartender because that was the restaurant / bar. And he goes, oh, man, don't worry. I got a special for you. Beef ribs. A plate of beef ribs for like $7. No problem. For you, I take care of you. Your flight crew, I take care of you. I'm like, oh, that sounds pretty good, actually. So I'll take a good IPA and a plate of those beef ribs. I shit you not. When they brought that plate of beef ribs out, it was like watching that Brontosaurus rack from the Flintstones being brought out and plopped down in front of Fred Flintstone. Every eye in that place was looking at this giant pizza tin full of beef ribs, a mountain of them. And they're like, whoa, man, what big party ordered those? And he plops them right down in front of me. And he's like, oh, enjoy. You can, whatever you don't eat, take it to your room. I'll bring you some boxes. I'm like, oh my God. Seriously. I mean, I had ribs, and more ribs, and some beer, and I was just full and happy, and took it back to my room. And sure enough, I had ribs later that night for a late night snack, and I had ribs for breakfast the next day and ribs for lunch. And yeah, after a while, it was a bit much, but yeah, he hooked me up. He took care of me. Long story short, I did make it home 3 days late, but I made it home. And when I saw the condition Chicago was in on the news, it was the most snowfall in 24 hours I had seen in a long time, if not ever. And so I survived snow apocalypse, Snowmageddon, Snowzilla. I did get stuck. I got stuck in Canada. Not a big deal. But at the end of the day, it turned out okay. I survived. So the last segment of this episode I'd like to talk about is something that I've been asked about quite a bit over my years as an aviator. And that's, what do you pack? What do you guys, how can you be prepared? And I've seen people pack so little, literally they bring a kit bag. And you're like, well, where's your overnight bag? It's like, well, everything I need in here, clean set of underwear and a clean undershirt, and I'm good to go. And like, oh, really? Well, that's it? You don't leave the hotel room? I mean, nope. That's all I need for this 2-day trip. And it's like, well, what if you end up getting stuck somewhere? Like, oh, well, then I'll have to go buy clothes, I guess. I always do my best to try to help people out, try to help the driver get bags in and out of the back of the van. I try to help as many people as I can, especially those in the working group, anywhere I can. And so I can't tell you how many times I picked up a crew member's bag for them. And I'm like, oh my God, do you even have anything in here? I mean, what do you take? Oh yeah, no, I got some underwear, and same story. And then there are other crew members, and I'm not going to single out any particular crew member in terms of cabin crew and flight crew, but some crew members, they've got their overnight bag, and they've got another bag, like a kit bag, and then they have like another bag, and then they have a purse, and it's like, whoa, it's like, holy crap, this is like, are you moving? And they packed everything, including the kitchen sink. So what do you pack? Now, I have a system that has worked for me for close to 20 years. And I always have a little bit of everything, but not too much of one thing. So, long pants, short pants, swim trunks, flip-flops, running shoes, running gear, toiletries, of course. And I always pack for an extra day. So this trip that I'm doing tomorrow is going to be a 4-day trip. So I have enough to bring me through the Hawaii location overnight, the Phoenix location overnight. And in the event that I get in a colder area, I have enough sweaters and whatnot to kind of hold me over that I can make do. So I overpack a little bit, but I never am in a situation where I say, well, I can't really go hang out or go anywhere because it's snowing outside and I didn't bring anything for that. So I'm always kind of ready to go with what I pack. I remember one time I was giving IOE to a new captain back at the regional, and it was something that I did for over 5 years. I was a line check airman. It was a wonderful experience. I really enjoy teaching and learning from people, and so it was a good time in my career. Actually, probably one of the best times of my career. And I was flying with this newer captain. Had never been PIC before. I went through the training, did great, and we did a trip together. And with IOE, it's an initial operating experience for those of you who aren't familiar with the term. You fly with a check airman, and so you're on the line, and the check airman's sitting in the right seat, and they're still signing the logbook and doing all the captain stuff, but really they're monitoring you to make sure that you're all good to go, that your training went okay, that you're experienced enough to where you don't have any questions about the duties and responsibilities of being a captain. So I'm flying with this guy, and he's doing great. He's a great pilot, good personality, and we ended up in Champaign, Illinois. Champaign, college town, really nice town, and as we're flying on final approach, he was flying, he's doing a good job. I look outside for a moment, and I can see down on the university campus on one of the fields, it was just a sea of classic cars. And I thought, wow, they must be having a classic car show. That would be really cool to go see on this overnight. And the college campus was literally stone's throw from our overnight hotel. So as we landed and, ran through the parking checklist, I said, "Hey man, you did a great job today. Let's go debrief at the hotel and I'll tell you, all the things that we're going to do for tomorrow. And then afterwards, let's go and get dinner or something and grab a beer. And hey, there's a car show that I saw. We were flying over. Maybe we can go see that." And he goes, "Oh, well, I'll grab a bite to eat with you, but I really didn't pack any clothes." And I'm like, "Wait, what? Hey, but I saw you have an overnight bag." And he's like, "Yeah, well, my wife usually packs my bag for me, and she didn't pack any of my street clothes in there." I'm like, wait a minute. You don't pack your own bag?" He's like, "Well, normally she throws everything in there that I need, and she didn't do that this week, and I'm really kind of upset about it, but I just don't have any street clothes." I'm like, "Well, it's like 90 degrees outside. There's like a CVS or something down the street. If you want, I'll go with you. We can, you buy a pair of flip-flops and some shorts and a t-shirt and you're good to go, right?" He's like, "Well, I don't want to spend money on that stuff. I'll just wear my uniform pants and a white t-shirt. I'll be fine." So he goes, "But I don't want to go to the car show because I'm just not dressed for it." I said, "Okay." So, we went to dinner and it was fine. We had a good time. We had a couple beers at a local place and then we went back to the hotel and I thought, well, I want to go see this car show. So I went, saw the car show and it was pretty cool. And I got to see some really nice classic cars right there in the heart of Illinois. And as I retired back to the hotel, I noticed that there were a lot of these cars were starting to show up in the hotel parking lot. And then I could start to hear the burnouts that were starting. And, from I think the fourth floor where my hotel room was, I could hear it, I could smell it, and I opened the window and looked out, and there was a dirt parking lot where all these hot rods were being parked, and they were doing burnouts in the street and doing like a little kind of like a show off event. And of course, police didn't show up, but the smell of burned rubber was penetrating through the air conditioners and in the rooms. And finally I was like, man, if they don't quiet down here pretty soon, I got to get my rest. It's a really early morning start tomorrow. And sure enough, all the lights in that remote parking lot turned off right at 10 o'clock. Normally they'd be on all night, and you could hear the people sighing and, having to find their way, out of the lot and into the hotel. And the next morning I saw my IOE student, the captain, and I'm like, "Hey man, how'd you sleep?" He's like, "Oh man, I almost called the cops. These guys were doing burnouts in my room filled with just this smoke and rubber." And he was like, "I called downstairs. I'm like, you got to do something about this. I'm going to call the cops. This is ridiculous." And like, well, a lot of those guys are the local PD. they're showing off their cars, so, we hate to, they're our patrons. And so we're kind of stuck here between a rock and a hard place. We don't want to lose business. And he's like, "Well, if we cancel the flight tomorrow because I'm too tired, who do you think they're going to call? They're going to call you." So they ended up deciding to shut the lights off, which was a pretty smart move on the hotel's part. And it was able to, minimize the noise and everybody kind of was able to get their rest. And it turned out to be a positive thing. I thought it was pretty smart to turn those lights off like that. But yeah, a total tangent. Do apologize for that, but that was the memory of that event where I flew with somebody who just forgot to pack any street clothes. So don't forget to pack street clothes, guys, simply because you're just going to miss out unless you're the type that wants to sit in your room and watch movies you've seen 100 times. Hey, whatever floats your boat, right? So in closing of this episode, just, hey, for all of you listeners out there, thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe. Future episodes are going to include all kinds of stories that I have collected over the years, and more on just what is happening in everyday routine, not just with work, but with what's going on at home too, because being at home and juggling family life with an aviation career is one of the biggest strains on an aviator's life. And we're going to really dive into those moments and how to cope with that in future episodes. I'd like to thank all those who have reached out with all the positive energy and positive thoughts. And just want to remind everyone, www.av8rtony.com. That's Alpha Victor, the number 8, Romeo Tango Osco November Yankee.com. There are links to the show, to the podcast. There are links to donation sites and shopping through Zazzle.com, where I have a few designed gear, hats, cups, stickers, and whatnot. If you'd like to be a contributor to the show, I will recognize all those who decide to contribute, and you can do a one-time donation directly through the www.aviatortony.com, or you can do a recurring sponsorship and be a producer of the show. That can be done through the Anchor website. If you search Squawk Ident on anchor.fm, there is a link there to subscribe and to do a monthly donation, everywhere from 99 cents and up, and every little bit helps. Putting on a podcast requires equipment and software, and just a lot goes into it. So I do appreciate all those who have already reached out. I absolutely appreciate your support. I would also like to remind you that we are on social media. Occasionally I have an opportunity to put a cool picture from one of the sequences I'm flying, from the road, from the layovers, and it's a great way to connect through there as well, either through Instagram or Facebook. Just search Squawk Ident Podcast. I'd also like to just absolutely thank you, the listener. Having this opportunity to talk about what goes on in this career and in my daily life with aviation has been a really positive experience. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to listen to this grateful aviator. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Be safe and take care of each other.